there's a shift in the global economy, okay? This slide, this is a Goldman Sachs slide, beautiful slide, but basically what it shows, the top line, is when is China going to overtake the US as the world's largest economy? And it says at about 2040. The point is that the center of gravity, economic, is moving to Asia and some of it to the Middle East. So this last part of my presentation, I'll just take 2 more minutes, okay? This last part of the presentation is to address one of the biases that people have about the Middle East and about the kinds of institutions that are in place. This is the slide that I think most Westerners view MENA in the Middle East. And this is World Bank data, and it ranks countries in terms of democracy. And you look on the far left, to your left, those are all of the Middle Eastern economies where democracy, the extent to which people choose their governments, is low. And you look at the G7 or the G8, they're all up at the top right. And everybody views the Middle East in that window, okay? But then let's go through and look at some of the other measures, okay? Political stability. What I want you to focus in on is there's no longer that dichotomy that you saw on the democracy. On the democracy, there was a big split. Here you start to see there's some blurring, and you look at the United Arab Emirates and Qatar up near the top. You look at government effectiveness. Now all of a sudden that dichotomy is disappearing. You look at regulatory quality. You see, wow, these governments in MENA are really trying to attract business. They're trying to be open to be globally competitive. The rule of law. That dichotomy is gone. But I think the most important one is one on corporate governance. And this is the one that I think matters most. And when you think about going to the GCC or to the MENA region and dealing with their major corporations, I'm going to show you data now from the World Economic Forum. The red are the G7 countries, the blue are the MENA. And this first one's on ethical behavior of firms. Again, this is data from the World Economic Forum, and I could spend a day defining these data for you, but there's not that big dichotomy where you've got the G7 countries at the top of the heap and the MENA countries at the bottom. Look at strength of auditing and reporting. Okay? Look at efficacy of corporate boards, where you've got Qatar number 2. I love this slide because Canada's number 1. But efficacy of corporate boards. And you look at protection of minority shareholders. That dichotomy that you saw when it comes to democracy that I think most Western business people look at the Middle East through, it's completely not there when you start looking at issues of corporate governance and institutions. So you put all these pieces together. Tremendous liquidity. There's something about Islamic finance that makes it an attractive structure for finance. You look at Canada and the industries that we're competitive in, and we're a natural partner to the Middle East, to those countries. And now you put all those pieces together. Emergence of the Gulf and the MENA region. Many opportunities there are based on Islamic finance. If you want to do business with people in the Middle East, you need to understand the lingo, you need to understand the strategies, you need to understand what Islamic finance is so we can communicate with them. That's why there's the need for educational programs, which hopefully Rotman will fill that void. Canada needs foreign investment. Our foreign investment shares have been slipping, so we need foreign investment. So you bring all of these pieces together. Now is the time for Canada to be more receptive to Islamic finance. And with that, I will stop. Thanks.
Yes, and the next to speak will be Blake, who's the author of the report.
You want to sit here?
No, I'll be okay. Last summer, I wrote a report that was published by Yasaar Media on Islamic finance in North America. It's available for free on their website, yasaarmedia.com. The report covered many areas in more general or more specific terms than I'll be able to go into today, and also had a fantastic section on legal and regulatory transaction details from Issam Saleh of King & Spalding. The report begins with an overview of the growth of Islamic finance in North America, which began around 1980. I think the first cooperative was started in 1979 in Canada. Most of the growth since 1980, between 1980 and about 2000, was very slow. It wasn't growing particularly rapidly, and it was focused on two primary areas. Home finance was the first one, and that was in part due to the larger transaction sizes of buying a home. It's one of the largest purchases any individual will make, and so it was sort of fertile ground for developing different transaction structures that were needed to comply with Sharia. The other area was the mutual fund area, and the mutual funds were concentrated until about 2000 in the Amana funds. I think, yeah. And as you can see, the Amana funds, even today, remain by far the largest segment of mutual funds in the United States. They have $2.5 billion. I think I heard somebody earlier saying $2.75 billion in assets today versus around $40 million for the rest of the players in the U.S. market, and that excludes any Canadian funds. In addition to the retail side of the business, the wholesale Islamic finance, that is institutions working with other institutions, developed along a almost completely separate track from the retail institutions. And there's been very little intermingling, as I think Stephen mentioned earlier when he was discussing trying to get institutional interest in Islamic finance in North America from the Gulf. The earliest projects were often run by the major banks. I know Citigroup was involved in some of them, JP Morgan, and those are primarily one-off projects, primarily real estate developments, where investors primarily from the Gulf came into North America with looking for a destination for their funds, and often that ended up in real estate, and so each transaction was separately structured to comply with Sharia. And as with retail, 2000 really marked the turning point in Islamic finance in North America. The wholesale market, the Gulf Investment House worked with Key Global Capital on two apartment construction projects, one in Maryland, which was the second one in 2001, and the first one was in Texas. And those were new construction transactions, and they were all based on the relatively new combination of an ijara and istisna financing, and that's been used extensively around the world since then. Just before the market for wholesale Islamic finance broadened a little bit with the growth of our Capital, which is a Bahrain-based Islamic bank that set up operations as Crescent Capital in Atlanta, Georgia in 1998, and later in about 2005, they merged the corporate identity. And Gulf Investment House, in addition to our Capita, later, and this is on a later slide, our Capita focuses primarily on private equity and a little bit of venture capital, and Unicorn Bank set up the UIB Capital out of Chicago, which deals also in private equity. Since 2000, there have been the entrance of a lot of non-bank financial institutions, such as Guidance Residential is the largest. And these banks have widened the product offering in the Islamic finance market in North America, primarily because of regulatory issues, and banks are not easily able to enter into, for example, musharaka co-ownership plans, and non-bank financial institutions, which are regulated differently, are. The mutual funds has expanded, as I mentioned, in terms of total assets, it's fairly concentrated within the Amana funds, but there are two other funds, the Iman Fund, which used to be the Dow Jones Islamic Fund, and the Azad Ethical Midcap Fund, which is a fund company based out of Virginia. But as I said, the bulk of the assets in mutual funds is in the Amana funds.